Distinguished Lectures. I'm Jessie Claudio from the IPC. It's a special honor to be your moderator this afternoon because we're celebrating two significant events. So this is the Distinguished Lecture, the first Distinguished Lecture po, no? And the 65th anniversary of the Institute of Philippine Culture. So our theme this year is 65 taon na makabuluhang pananaliksik at pakikipag-ugnayan na magtaguyod ng inklusibong pagbabago, which reflects our commitment to meaningful research and engagements in promoting inclusive change. To officially open our program, please join me in welcoming Dr. Zarina Saloma Akpedonu, Dean of the Dr. Rosita G. Leong School of Social Sciences. To officially open our program, please join me in welcoming
Director of the Institute of Philippine Culture, Dr. Marichi Guevara, former Director of the Institute of Philippine Culture, Mr. Marcos Calo Medina, Mark Calo Medina, who will deliver the inaugural lecture of the Lynch SJ Distinguished Lecture. Our discussants, Dr. Roberto Galang, Dean of the John Gokongwei School of Management, Dr. Fernando Shalcita, Professor, Department of Sociology and Anthropology, and Mr. Eric Akpedonu, Research Associate of the Institute of Philippine Culture and Lecturer of the Department of Fine Arts. Research Scientists, Research Associates, among them, Dr. Mahar Mangahas and Architect Ning Encarnacion, Research Assistants, Visiting Researchers, Administrative Staff, both former and present incumbents, faculty, students, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Congratulations to each and everyone at the IPC on the Institute's 65th anniversary. Among the birthday greetings that the ever-precise Germans use is the verb gratulieren, or congratulation. So it's not just to greet someone a happy birthday. So in the case of the IPC, it's not just to greet the IPC with happy anniversary, but to congratulate. So not just to greet, but to congratulate, gratulire, the IPC for its achievements, in fostering a sense of community, connection, and belonging between and among employees and the extra academic audiences. It is to congratulate IPC for its longevity. That's 65 years of work. Anniversary celebrations are an opportunity to reflect on past successes while looking forward to future goals and milestones, especially beginning with the establishment in 1960 with the vision of Father Frank Lynch of the Society of Jesus. So let's reflect a bit. The address of IPC in the university, in the academic world, is Dr. Rosita G. Leong School of Social Sciences, Ateneo de Manila University. So IPC belongs to the school, the Leong School of Social Sciences, to the Ateneo de Manila University. Established in 1859, Ateneo de Manila is a Catholic, Jesuit, and Filipino university, collaborating and leading the work of education reform and transformation, university, health and well-being, integral ecology, and bridging cultural divides. This is what the university said we will contribute to in our work. The four strategic priority areas in education, health, ecology, and culture. In the Leong School of Social Sciences, we help fulfill the university's mission by promoting a way of doing the social sciences that is anchored on interdisciplinarity, and nowadays we recognize it's not enough to be interdisciplinary, but also transdisciplinarity, recognizing that there is a higher level, a higher form of interdisciplinarity, and that is to recognize other sources, other provinces of knowledge. So we do interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. We also pursue translocality and problem solving from deep time, because we now have archaeology in the school, from deep time, historical, and contemporary perspectives. By design, by intent, and by nature, the Leong School of Social Sciences contribute mostly to the university's work in bridging cultural divides. The Institute of Philippine Culture contributes to the mission by helping link the university with the public in a time when academic disciplines are no longer the only sources of knowledge. Yet, also when universities are called more than ever to bring intellectual and practical leadership to the societies they are embedded in. To the idea of translocality, the IPC is an important component with the social sciences pushing towards global area studies, the IPC being a pioneer in Philippine studies, because it's, after all, the Institute of Philippine Culture. It's a global area studies institute. When it was established, Father Frank Lynch envisioned the IPC to provide empirically grounded research on society in the university, primarily dedicating itself to the systematic investigations of Philippine society and culture. Among its knowledge products are ways of doing research: grounded ethnographic research, process documentation research, participatory action research. And this is really where IPC, with these techniques, is going to contribute to the problem-solving mode in the social sciences. So when I became dean 5 years ago, I reminded the school that it's not enough to analyze. A social scientist is not even enough to critique. The work of the social sciences is to offer practical results. To offer practical results is to solve problems. So the IPC is central to problem-solving mode in the social sciences with the research that it is undertaking with various government agencies, with various communities, with various organizations. So we have succeeded in highlighting the need for empirically grounded research in society. Of course, that was 65 years ago. We have succeeded. Every organization is asking for data. Those who want to commission studies with IPC realize the need for data. Now, the next step is what to do with the data. Data for whom? Data for what? We are not going to answer that question today, but hopefully we don't need another 65 years to find the answer. What I know is that after pushing for the problem-solving mode, reminding people, it's not that we didn't do it, but we have to be reminded. To name is to know that what we are doing is problem-solving in the social sciences. So after several years of doing problem-solving mode or trying to do problem-solving, we have concluded that it is the hardest but also the most fulfilling way to do the social sciences, the problem-solving mode, blending together rigorous academic practice and deep engagement with Philippine society toward making institutions and systems fulfill their function. It is very difficult to do. Try offering a solution from your data sets. As the astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson is quoted, in science, when human behavior enters the equation, things go non-linear. This is why physics is easy and sociology is hard. It is thus fitting that we have invited Mr. Marcos Calo Medina, who will deliver the inaugural lecture of the Lynch SJ Distinguished Lecture series. Mark, I know we visited his house at the start of the year. Mark deeply engaged himself with both the theory and practice of house restoration. Thank you, Mark, for saying yes to our invitation. Thank you for your intellectual generosity. Let's all have an insightful time this afternoon.
I'll introduce
Oh, right. Sorry.
Maraming salamat po, Dean Bopi, and for recognizing 65 years of IPC's impact in Philippine society, as well as a reminder for students who are online and our research associates and assistants here of our function in problem solving. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished lecturer. So Mark Calo Medina has graduate degrees from Oxford University in Development Studies and Social Anthropology. He conducted ethnographic fieldwork in Mexico for his doctoral research on the anthropology of Catholicism among the Celtal Maya of Chilon, Chiapas. He entered the UP College of Music for his undergraduate studies and moved to the universities of Xiamen, Beijing, and Tianjin for a degree in classical Chinese literature. He has worked as reporter for the Associate Press News Agency in Beijing, Hong Kong, and Taipei. So Mark will be sharing his insights on the ritual kinship and materiality of a 19th century Filipino home in Arayat, Pampanga. And his lecture is based on the Alejandrino Medina House, a wood and bamboo transition house built in the 1860s. No, so without further ado, I will give the floor over to Mark Medina.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bopi, for the invitation. I know this was a long time in the making. We first thought about this when Bopi and my former supervisor from Oxford, David Gellner, came over for lunch months ago. When was that? January, right. Anyway, we get started. How do I do this? Oh, sorry. We enjoy looking at old houses, especially those more than a century old, grip our imagination at a time when they slowly disappear from our architectural landscape. With this loss, so do the meanings we attach to them. Or maybe it's the other way around. The ways in which we organize ourselves and our modes of social communion, feeding, eating, praying, living together, procreation, reproduction, emotion. Maybe those have changed, manifesting themselves in the ways we think about built form and domestic space. After all, it was Frank Lynch himself who said that society was, quote, a system of complex interactions between and among groups, motivated by individual self-interest or group interests and incentives. Relationships evolve and change, Father Lynch writes, as they present different pictures seen from different angles. That is, structuration seen from the complex prism of values. Perhaps it is our own experience of domestic life, of childhood gone, tradition vanished, and memories recalled, that draws us into old houses. In this lecture, I would like to focus on three aspects of a house from my own standpoint of owner, observer, and observed, to explore what it means for an old house to be a living entity whose animacy grew and still grows from a mix of social relations and personal biographies of its residents. We can take this even further to argue, as Lévi-Strauss did, that a house is a moral person whose architectural form is shaped by constant changes in kinship relations. The house is a member of the family, we might say, not just a space in which a family resides. It is a material object, a thing that holds the imaginative power and sensual memory of childhood. On a deeper level, the stability of ownership of old houses and the persistence of tradition within it demonstrates that a house can be cultural artifact as well as domestic unit. It can be a site of incorporative processes through various idioms, as anthropologists like to say, the performance of religion, the rituals of commensality, the conforming regularity of living with and living through material objects. The ways these material, social, and symbolic aspects of the house, any house, old or new, the way these aspects converge, diverge, provide fertile ground to interrogate the malleability of material objects as vehicles for the social. When is a house more than just a house? When does a house become a home? The history of the Alejandrino Medina house in Arayat, Pampanga begins in the mid-1800s with my great-grandfather's father. What was then the family home is now the kitchen. A simple structure of bamboo, wood, and nipa in keeping with the vernacular architecture of the time. As the family grew larger and fortunes improved, my great-grandparents, Juan Medina and Luisa Gabriel, the two older characters on the left, most photo, Juan Medina and Luisa Gabriel extended the large Bahay Kubo with what is now the main residence. Wooden panels supported by hardwood posts on an adobe base, covered with a pitched roof of bamboo and nipa. My grandmother Gertrudis, second in the photo from the left, was born by the foothills of Mount Arayat in 1899 to Gertrudis Gabriel Medina and Manuel Magdangal Alejandrino. Two photos on the right. Manuel Magdangal Alejandrino was younger brother next in line to General Jose Alejandrino. He was given a diploma from Assumption, Iran in 1917, even if she never completed her secondary education. She was pulled out at the age of 14 to run a farm of what was then around 300 hectares, which grew even larger in the succeeding decades. My grandparents and three aunts lived in Arayat until 1939, when they moved to Malate, where my father grew up. What you see in this picture is the earliest existing photo I have of the house. It's dated 1912 on the left. That's a picture of the Easter Salubong rituals. And I think indicative of the role the house has played with respect to religious rituals, which I will discuss later. There's an old story told by my late grandmother's cook that before my grandmother left Arayat for Intramuros to give birth to my father in 1939, she walked the entire perimeter of the house, inside and outside, remembering every post, every corner, every panel in every room. My grandmother was 40, a late pregnancy at the time, but despite three earlier daughters, she feared the same fate as her mother, who died giving birth to her during the Philippine Revolution in 1899. It is my grandmother who we associate most closely with the house. It was her home, as was her estate that supported it, her staff, her processional images, her carrozas, her family. Among the generations of Medinas who lived in the house, me being the sixth, my grandmother set the tone, what we cooked and how we cooked, what we ate and how we ate, how we related to staff in the ways the house attended to its religious obligations and organized itself as domestic unit. My grandmother was the constant referent in our family's understanding of the house. Since I began restoration 4 years ago, my architect's right there, by the way, Ning Encarnacion Tan, I would ask myself at every turn, would my grandmother have approved? Would she have liked it? The picture you see right now is pre-restoration, when the pitched bamboo and nipa roof, installed air conditioning in all mining element of, that is the kitchen and as the process of anchoring is long, and the longer houses have been with the family, the more they are thought of as inalienable. That is to say, outside the sphere of commodity exchange. There was my grandmother's cook activities from the people with whom they live. The house then emerges as a key various components of relatedness can come together in one particular site that is the house. Likewise, other site that is the house. Likewise, I have attempted to demonstrate, and I paraphrase Janet Carson again, how combinations of various everyday elements can overflow capacity to generate new meanings of being related. What you see in the slide, imagined, augmented, or indeed exhausted and broken. creates an oral and visual sensorium rooted in emotion within the specific materiality of form. Anthropologists have taught us that we reach for the ineffable through material objects, producing an embodied sociality that negotiates a range of social relations. Spirits and Pampangans define themselves, are immobilized or embodied in a stable center that is the house. Within this built architecture of the material, architecture are the material points of contact between the living and the dead, man-made containers, as it were. But as Douglas Turner Geertz point out, to have social relations, who helps us understand this chaos within a coherent, somewhat formal frame, helps us understand this chaos within a coherent social groups, linking past to present and present to future. Ritual, in the words of Daniel Kurtzer, builds confidence in our own sense of self by providing us with a sense of community, continuity. In other words, come to be socially alive. Can we not ask ourselves then, under what circumstances should houses be allowed to die?
At the Department of Fine Arts and Research Associate at the Institute of Ask Mark to respond to the reactions before we proceed with the open forum. So siguro po, we would like to ask Dean Galang for his reaction.
Thank you very much, and thank you also to the IPC for inviting me to speak. I've known Mark for decades, primarily because we're related. Sige, I'll claim it. Tita Susan Calo Medina, her sister, Eleanor Calo, married my dad's brother, Emilio Galang. No? And it's a discussion, so I own that story. So I'm a little intimidated because I was expecting it once, and of course, if you visited there, you have to go through the whole spread with the food details. That's probably why Joel's there all the time. I can't blame him. But when Mark started quoting Bourdieu and Levi Strauss and materiality, I was like, oh my, I only quote Adam's School of Management. When I see old houses, they really fascinate me. But the question that I ask is not about kinship or social ties, but it's really about paano ba yung para makapagtayo ng bahay na ganito kaganda, no? In essence, because apart from the narrative of the stories that build it, they're actually of Intramuros, for example. I mean, these are really built because of donations of wealthy people from the Philippines, right? So the beautiful town of Arayat is really built by the efforts that were conducted by the people that live there, no? And in fact, what Mark was telling me is that not only the house is beautiful, but Arayat Church used to be the biggest. You had a lot of agricultural growth, primarily rice and sugar, that created the wealth that could create these houses and these carroza, right? And so, unfortunately, even though Arayat has that tremendous history, one of the reasons why a lot of these houses can be preserved is that, unfortunately, Arayat's growth does not follow its counterparts like Angeles or San Fernando. And I think the reasons for this are a number of them, no? One is that apart from the fact that Arayat used to have like a big church or an ice plant, a cigarette factory, and a lot of mill, no? It's the fact that it grew a lot of these products that we started to consume, and we also started to export. But unfortunately, sugar, for which Arayat and most of Pampanga is known for, is also one of the also a very oppressive crop, because unlike, let's say, if you grew pineapples or mangoes, as a farmer, you can sell that directly to live and very painful to grow, but you also get stuck mill because your sugar cane has zero sugar, right? And this is why in places where you had a lot of sugar growth, you not only had a lot of wealth. Part of the Arayat story is that it's also the area where, especially in the 1930s, in communist movements. So in fact, the Alejandrino that is part of the story of this house is also related to Alejandrino, right? So the guy who founded the Partido Comunista ng Pilipinas. And also the people that unfortunately became a very violent area, especially during the 30s, carrying into the bloody Hook Rebellion. And so in essence, while Arayat was able to grow and thrive in the 30s and 40s, unfortunately, because apart from being wonderfully beside the Mount Arayat, which is, if you drive the North Luzon Expressway, you see the beautiful mountain rising up after you cross the Candaba Swamp. It's both beautiful and it's recent times, no? And of course, if you have an area with lots of violence, then it's very difficult for an economic engine to grow. So eventually the ice plant would close. And then finally, what we know more about Arayat is also a function of geography. It's because while Arayat in the olden days was a great location because it was a crossing point of the Pampanga River, none of us go by rivers today, right? And so the development of Pampanga went from the river. So the parts of Pampanga that are now very, very much more developed, San Fernando, Angeles, Clark, it's really all those that get past new train that they're building today. And so you have a lot of preservation of history, have a lot of preservation of history, of traditions, is because this is very difficult to do in a place like Angeles, for example, where you have many people from there, so they don't have as much of the historical background. They're not from, many of them are not from San Fernando. They weren't born in and so it's good that we're able to see a lot of these stories and preserve a lot of these traditions and remember a beautiful history that exists and also a bloody history that exists, right? But it's like Lightning McQueen's town because they're also economically bypassed. And so thankfully, you now have a house in the flesh with Mark, and hopefully with all his stories and the preservation of this house, it can become revive the town and create the economic benefits that revive the town and create the economic benefits that the people of Arayat deserve. The economic benefits that the people of Arayat deserve. So thank you very much. People of Arayat deserve. So thank you very much. Congratulations again, Mark.
Thank you for inviting. 1850s was a crucial capitalism spread from Britain to the rest of the world. So before that, the Philippines was feudal. Land was accumulated, was highly protected. But now all of that disappeared after the Napoleonic Wars. Enter, free trade was established. In fact, the produce was exported as a very saleable commodity to the Philippines. It was precisely in Pampanga and Negros that the large sugar estates developed. Because formerly, the Philippines was the first bank in Southeast Asia is opened, Banco Español. So what Mark was saying about the larger house, I've always pointed out that there's actually a connection between this type of architecture and the longhouse of the Datu, as described by Alcina and to a certain extent by Quirino. Because Alcina points just with the dirt in between the joists. And I've seen this actually in San Fernando. It's used even in the large houses for cleansing ceiling. It doesn't necessarily hold water. And during at the eve of the Spanish conquest, there was actually a casket that was kept in a bedroom in the innermost part of the house, together with the jewelry and the other prized house from intruders. Now, I've always held that I think so the Passion became the substitute for the Lamentations sung over the body of the Datu. Became the substitute for the mummified body of the Datu. This has not been emphasized enough because in Spain or Mexico, for example, you never keep up. My Spanish Mexican friends are horrified. Why you keep processional images at the bedroom? Unheard of. Because those images are kept in the church or the cofradia, the confraternity, never at home. And processions in the Philippines are quite different because there's really no order to Spanish processions because Rosa, several replications or the crucifixion, but in the Philippines, you always this narrative, the passion and death of Christ, from the agony in the garden all the way to the crucifixion, and the climax belongs to in the town. Now, another reason I admire your house is because Jose Alejandrino Magdangal, because he fought Spaniards, but against the Americans till the very end. So there is this nationalist narrative that gave up on the struggle. But it was thanks to the masses that the struggle continued. I don't think the historical figure, Magdangal, they fought against the very end. That's also true in Batangas. I noticed that with Malvar and with Lopez's of Balayan. Also, it's your Lola that actually composed that beautiful song. I mean, the lyrics for that beautiful song that everybody sings now, Bayan Ko. He composed it in Spanish, actually. Nuestra Patria. The translation made by Jose Corazon de Jesus. Reference to the Americans has been removed. Because I think the translation was made in 1920. Because twice he calls the Americans traidor. And it tells the Philippines to get rid of the traitor. Sakuda del traidor, but it has been deleted. But anyway, that's why I always look back to the figure of your grandfather. Because of that, and composing this song, which everybody sings today. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mark, for this very interesting and very insightful presentation. Thank you also for what is arguably a very beautiful home, beautifully restored. Earlier this year, I was really impressed. I love the place. I think it's a great job done. But this wouldn't be a reaction if there wasn't a big but. You raised an interesting question, which of course I'm sure you discussed it extensively with your architect Encarnacion, which is and what to discard. Very difficult question. You may think it's easy, it is not. It's actually one of the most difficult things to do in restoration. As I have myself learned, as my wife and I started on the restoration of the Saloma house in Baclayon, where we were faced with the same question: how much do we change the house, but try to keep the original spirit alive while adapting it to modern times and modern materials? No? Talk about fire safety, talk about egress, talk about livability. What to discard and what to keep. Now, you mentioned you have been restoring the house. That begs the question, what is the restoration? A restoration, by definition, is putting a structure back into a previously existing condition. From the images that I have seen, I would say the area you're looking at is something around 1900, more or less, plus minus 20 years in either direction, which is fine because the result is strikingly beautiful. However, if we look at restoration and look at it from a historical or cultural perspective, what is a legitimate historical and cultural layer? Now, we could take it from the technical perspective and we look at the law, and the law in the Philippines older than 50 years is by definition potentially heritage. It is not necessarily heritage, but it is potentially heritage to be decided by the national cultural agencies. Now that brings us to an interesting question. You mentioned that the house was renovated in 1959. Now 1959 is, that is roughly 65 years ago. The heritage law says, okay, anything older than 50 years is potentially heritage. Now 50 years, okay, let's calculate together. 2025 minus 50 years is 1975. 1975, well, that is almost yesterday. I would argue probably 50% of all the houses in Metro Manila are older than 1975. So what is a legitimate layer? What to keep, what to discard? Shall we keep everything that is from the Spanish period and take out everything that is American and post-war? Or do we draw the line in, say, 1948? We'll keep everything that is colonial, Spanish and American, but we discard everything that is post-war? Or do we draw the line at 1975 and say everything that was put in the house until 1975 is heritage and the rest we can dispose of or not? It's a very, very difficult question, I know. So let's look at how some people have been addressing that issue in the past. I would like to refer to a famous restoration architect, which I'm sure you have heard about, Mr. Viollet-le-Duc of France, who in the 19th century was in charge of restoring heritage buildings in France that had been badly deteriorated, that had fallen into decay. And of course, in that time, in the 19th century, there was a particular approach, a certain philosophy of restoration, which is basically put the building back in the previous state, although not necessarily the state it was originally in, but rather in a state it could have been in. In other words, take out everything that is not pure to the style. So what he did is he looked at these old Gothic cathedrals in France, which over the centuries, okay, they were built in the Gothic style, but then over the centuries, there were Renaissance artwork put into it. There were Baroque artworks put into it, the pulpit, maybe ceilings, maybe murals. And he took all of those out and put the building back in its supposed original Gothic state. A state it probably was never in, because even in the Middle Ages, styles were never quite that pure. That happened in various places in France. For example, various churches, the palace, the Bishop's Palace of Sens, for example, was put back in a state it probably never had, even in the Middle Ages, because he emphasized purity. Purity of style, everything that is not going. This approach was taken, for example, when the Reichstag, the parliament building in Berlin, in Germany, was restored. It was badly destroyed by the Nazis, or during the Nazi time, later by the war. Then all kinds of things happened. And then when the capital was moved to Berlin in 1990, it was restored. And the obvious thing to do would be to say, okay, we remove all the damage of the war, we remove all the mess, and we make it exactly the way it looked when it was built in, ask me what, 1889? But that was not done. What actually happened was they decided to keep elements of the history. There were walls that were damaged by bullets during World War II. It wasn't plastered over. There were graffiti put in by Russian soldiers after they captured Berlin, some of them rather obscene, and they were not plastered over, but kept there in order to keep the history alive. So to conclude, what to keep, what to discard is a tricky question. You may want to have purity of style, but you also want to preserve meaningful layers. And my question to you is, how did you address this very tricky question with your architect? Because it is always a very, very difficult decision to take. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much.
How did I how did I address the questions with my architect? Well, I am the owner. I am paying. You follow me. It's as simple as that. But my architect, Ning, is a brilliant woman, very bright. We come from, her formation, she matured at the University of the Philippines in the 70s, at the time when nationalism was at the forefront of the academic discourse. Martial law, who we are as a Filipino. So in terms of ideas and meta theories, meta ideas, our arguments were mostly what is Filipino, what is rightfully Filipino, and that the Bahay Kubo is exclusively Filipino. And I'm thinking perhaps we're at the point where I'm coming from a place where it isn't, I know who I am as a Filipino. I know what is important to me as a Filipino. I'd like to know how I relate to my neighbors in Southeast Asia. So it's rather someone who matured in the 70s and someone who matured in the, never mind when, but later, clearly. So I'm looking more for, as an anthropologist, I'm not so much interested in the uniqueness of a particular culture, but how it relates to others. I'm looking for commonalities. I'm looking for instance, I quoted Janet Carson and the Langkawi houses because I see a lot of parallels in the way houses are being used and utilized and constructed. Now, whether the Bahay Kubo is uniquely in Filipino in the way space is conceptualized, that's another subject for discussion. But as for Eric's question, how did I grapple with the questions, what to keep and what to discard? Two main points. One is I wanted to keep what my grandfather had done in 1956. They may not be of that particular era because our basis, Pampanga's basis for a bamboo house of the 1840s and 1850s would be the Goshoko house in Santa Rita, which is purely bamboo. Of course, it's bamboo and nipa. Of course, it's falling apart and nobody lives inside anymore. But stylistically, we had a basis for comparison. We had a basis, do I go back to this? Do I not go back?
Remodeling of power relations. Power relations in the countryside. Dapat i-research din yon. That's all I'm trying to say. Kasi parang hindi pa tapos yun eh. Hindi pa tapos yun. That's why we have the longest, insurgency now, in all of the world going on here. See? So, wag kalimutan at i-research din yon. That's all I'm trying to say. Pero maraming salamat. I'm very glad to meet you.
Likewise.
And everybody here. Somebody told me you were related to Chochoy Medina. Hindi pala, that's different family. I'm glad to meet you.
I'm glad you raised the point about land reform. On the one hand, our family has yet to get paid for land reform that happened that began in 1963. The land bank still awaits 2 emancipation patents before they give me a check. Price is 2 pesos 70 cents per square meter. Per square meter, 2 pesos 70. So for 300 hectares, it's 5 million pesos, more or less. Never mind. Let that go. I'm fine with that. There's nothing I can do. It's done, it's over. That, my own personal sentiments aside, what I see now in a riot is something I was never conscious of in the 70s or 80s. It's something I'm sure my grandmother and my aunts would probably be uncomfortable with. But it's the fact that even down to the Kasamaks, they've been given a political voice. So if there's one benefit from land reform, from the agrarian revolution, it's that it's changed the social landscape of Arayat completely. By the way, we're the last town before Nueva Ecija. So our history, our social, political, and economic history, I think is closer to Nueva Ecija than the rest of Pampanga. So if there's one benefit from that, on a general sense, never mind our family's personal experience about land reform, it's that it's democratized, it's leveled the social landscape of Arayat. Of course, I sound contradictory in the sense that I'm also mentioning social capital, but that's something I inherited. That's not of my making, and that's certainly nothing I flaunt. But it's nice to pull your family name once in a while. Never mind. When there's something I need from municipio or the church. Anyway, so there. Going back to Dr. Mangahas's comment about land reform, I think what you're asking is whether it was a success in Arayat or not. I think so. Incomplete. Incomplete, haphazardly applied, arbitrarily applied. But here we are. But they're not farming anymore. They own their land. Yeah, but you know, Arayat was one of the first people that exported labor in the 70s, huh? When Saudi Arabia was calling for more work, a lot of people came from Arayat. So, you know, the economy's changed. So, and with it, we change. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Maraming salamat po, Mark, and also to people who ask questions. Ano po, siguro to close the program, let me call on Dr. Enrique Nino Leviste, Director of the Institute of Philippine Culture, who will deliver, again, the closing remark.
Good afternoon, everyone. So on behalf of the Institute of Philippine Culture, I would like to extend our deepest appreciation to Marcos Calo Medina, first and foremost, for the rich and evocative lecture he shared with us this afternoon. A house is not just a house, brought to life the Alejandrino Medina house, not simply as wood and bamboo, weathered by time, but as a living archive of kinship, ritual, and memory. Through your telling, Mark, we glimpsed how material objects are never just things, and how spaces hold histories of revolution, devotion, resilience, and everyday life. We are equally grateful to our discussants, Dean Robbie, Doc Butch, Eric, for deepening today's conversation, and to our Dean, Dean Bopi, for her leadership and steadfast support. Your insights and presence remind us that scholarship flourishes in dialogue, not in isolation. As we celebrate IPC's 65th anniversary, today's inaugural Frank Lynch Distinguished Lecture is not just an event. It is a reaffirmation of a tradition that Father Lynch began, empirically grounded, socially engaged research that walks with communities and listens to their stories. Father Lynch believed that anthropology in the Philippines should never be an abstract exercise, but a commitment to understand and accompany people where they live, love, and struggle. This afternoon, as we sat with Mark and listened to his reflections on a house that falls out of time but remains in place, we were reminded that institutions too endure when they are rooted in relationships and animated by purpose. May the conversations sparked here continue beyond these walls into our classrooms, our research, our communities, much like the Alejandrino Medina house continues to speak across generations. Maraming salamat po. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat.
Then, thank you po at meron po tayong merienda sa lab.